The earliest written stories are about gods, great wars, great journeys and battles, heroes, kings, duels, farming actually, and incomprehensible deeds of supernatural might. But in places like Persia, Israel, Rome, and Arabia, earthly and martial might and deeds became secondary to variously understood devotion to God, so that in the Christian Gospels and New Testament, for example, day-to-day life and common people were portrayed in famous world literature for some of the first times. Over time, the poetic purity and simplicity and grandiosity of the deeds of the supernatural beasts and women and men in epic poems became complicated by the psychological reflexiveness and depth of the novel. And gradually, as realist literature arose in the last few centuries, there became less and less of a focus on grandiose deeds and more of a focus on mundane struggles and down-to-earth observations, so that a common person who wasn't a king or a god often became the focus of art and storytelling. As such, when Super Mario Brother, then known as Jumpman, made his first appearance in the 1981 arcade game Donkey Kong, 20th century Japanese poet Shigeru Miyamoto opted to continue his culture's tendency to put a common person at the center of the story by creating a protagonist with many working class attributes. Whether he was a carpenter, a construction worker, or maybe a plumber, the key point was that this hero should not be a member of the nobility. He shouldn't be a demigod. Maybe he can be a monkey, but let's just focus on one project at a time, so that for the impressionable youngsters whose attention and pocket change was being extracted with this piece of digital media, a deep interpersonal connection could be forged between the working class man with blue hair and overalls on the screen and the hopeful youth gazing up at the cabinet, with overalls maybe, and who was destined for a working class life, and his only respite from the toils of labor would be the momentary escapism of the blue screen with which he would remain transfixed until his unremarkable demise in the mid to late 21st century. But as this young man, Jumpman, became increasingly popular and integrated into Mr. Miyamoto's increasingly ambitious projects, a peculiar setting was chosen for this hero's exploits. He could have opted for an urban backdrop, more conventionally befitting a working-class gentleman such as Mr. Mario Brother, a choice that would have been in keeping with the realist ambitions of most of Miyamoto's contemporaries, who always created stories with verisimilitudinous attributes, even in the video game medium once that became possible, but instead a grand, globe-trotting quest in search of a lost friend became the situation of the Mario Brother, who would now be given the epithet Super for the remainder of his illustrious career. Super Mario is not a traditional epic poem because it stars an everyman rather than a god or a noble, but it's also not a representational exploration of the plumbing profession that might have been expected from the exceptionally literal mindset of our scientific age, and which we actually do see in some of the adaptations of this character in other media.
Thanks, young McDonald. While you're here, would you mind taking a look at the sick carrots in the tub garden? Sure.
So, what's with all the mushrooms and the multifaceted fantasy elements? Just what are we dealing with when it comes to the Super Mario adventures? Like Gilgamesh, the Mesopotamian hero, Super Mario's best friend has been taken from him. It can be his girlfriend, it can be his brother, it doesn't matter. What concerns us is that the journey he undertakes is perhaps a quest to come to terms with or respond to this loss. When we boot up the game, we're met with many green fields, waving grasses, majestic cliffs and horizons. We'll explore many blue and echoey caves. But the omnipresence of the military outposts of the forces that have taken Super Mario's companion captive serve as a continuous reminder of the purpose of this quest. For only so long can you enjoy the majestic vistas of the many hills of the Mushroom Kingdom. Only so far with the double, triple jumps and backflips that make these exceptional platformers a joy to play, earning a solid 9.3. Only so long can we immerse ourselves in the flow state of pursuing our goals before the overbearing, ominous magistrates of our progress come to give their verdict. We're very sorry, but you haven't done it. Your princess is in another castle. You've done your best, but it won't cut it. If you thought this was a simple child's game, you're wrong. Technically, it's a simple game for everyone, but the point remains that over these grassy hills, you only see just how far away from your goal you really are. Towards the end of the first world, you're usually jumping on these big mushroom heads. For me, this was always the most obvious indication that we're on a non-representational adventure. It made the game seem a little more whimsical and fun. Caves and hills and castles, those can be comprehended in our physical reality. But like any real adventure, we realize that we're going to be stepping out of our comfort zone for this one and encountering a biome that doesn't have a naturalistic precedent. Also, ones that do too. For example, the desert. So you thought this would be fun, did you? You thought that traveling the world to fight an army was just something that you did. You're far enough from home now that there's a different feeling about this. If you were going to turn back, it probably would have been before the sprawling desert. Super Mario nevertheless prevails. He goes through the many trials, avoiding the many sandstorms and the sinkholes. For 40 minutes and 40 seconds he toiled through these dunes, exploring and usurping the many walls and tombs of these ancient lands. And once again, it started to fall into place. The platforming maneuvers were emotionally and physiologically satisfying to execute, and the vistas were as gorgeous as ever, even if the pyramids were a little on the nose. When you come to the castle of the second world, it's a little less overbearing this time. You've kind of been here before, and even though it might be a little bit predictable and contrived that the opportunity to save the princess is snatched from our hands again in almost exactly the same way, at least there's a damn structure, a guiding force, a beacon of sorts, so that you don't get lost in these sprawling dunes. Lonely though the desert might be, at least you can say that you've crossed it. But as we come to the sandy shores of the beaches that touch the waters of the next leg of our adventure, the sun sets on the sparkling sea, and darkness overtakes the land. We take shelter in an abandoned house, only to find untold horrors. At the very end of my Uncharted video, John Vervaeke, who is one of those YouTube public intellectuals where you're never 100% sure about their credibility, laid out 3 characteristics of video games that make them enjoyable and that we also have trouble finding in real life, thanks to our malaise of disjointed and ineffectual, disingenuous principles by which we structure our actual lives. Basically, in a video game, there's a logical narrative that follows a comprehensible structure that's reliable. We don't understand life, so it's not the same out there. Secondly, there are clear boundaries to the consequences of your actions. We're still looking for the laws and rules that govern the real universe. Lastly, there's a clear path to advancement, to leveling up and ascending. In the real world, we can make these social structures that mimic our desire to constantly mark our progress and achieve some higher level of, Well, anything, as long as it's measurable. But unless we limit the scope of our human ambitions to the purview of specific rites and traditions, they won't be a source of comprehensive fulfillment. In a Super Mario game, the Boo Houses serve as the only respite for the ambiguity that we find in the real world. Doors might lead you in circles rather than immediately towards your next destination, or disappear altogether. The little one-dimensional map tracking your progress across the level is compromised, and the ghosty ghoulies themselves can't be killed, and Super Mario never sees them move, which must be rather anxiety-inducing from his point of view. In the Super Mario world, our paths don't wind, but stay the course, and we never have to feel remorse. In our world, the roads are many, and they might not be optimally designed. Overall, I don't like the Boo Houses because they slow me down, and they make me think when I'm just trying to play a 3DS. How many working class people, how many people have been to the moors of Europe, the dunes of Egypt, the beaches of the West Indies, the Amazon, Mount Baker, Sand Dune Cave, and Mitra Peak, other than the European explorers whose zeitgeist was probably inherited by the booming, substantially westernized Japanese culture that produced Super Mario? Is there anything more beautiful than climbing a mountain? The only respite against the overbearing monotony or complexity of realism in art today is the fantasy genre. And there too, there's always a mountain range. It's usually one of the last legs of the journey, one of the most mythologized actions in human history. How often do we stop to think about the feats of this young man? For most of us, when you get to the top of a mountain, you have to descend. But Super Mario Brother is no mere mortal. When he gets to the top of the mountain, he's not finished. He keeps going up. This whole time, throughout all these toils, Mario has been separated from his friend. He's still searching for her. He must have been listening to Marvin Gaye and Tamil Terrell. I don't know. Does he really love her this much? Everyone else who circumnavigated the earth did it for glory or treasure. What's the psychological drive of this brave young man? People scoff and laugh at the simplicity of the Super Mario story, but whether we actually feel it while playing the games or not, there is a very powerful connection between these characters. Traveling makes you tired. It's dangerous. It's expensive. The obstacles that stand between these two people are on the order of landscapes upon landscapes. And it's not just that Mario doesn't stop searching for her. He doesn't stop enjoying it. If I had to travel this far to save somebody, I would be a grouchy, or at least a stoic person by the end of it. That's if I even got to the end of it. Mario is dancing his way over the clouds, shouting "Wahoo!" as everything and everyone tries to kill him. He's like a shonen hero. It's not just that nothing will stop him. Nothing will stop the joyfulness of his spirit. The purity of his actions are bolstered by an impenetrable self-understanding. He doesn't have the self-consciousness that's so characteristic of all the people in realist stories. He's more like Achilles. He already knows perfectly well who he is, and he will see his adventure through, or he will die. Søren Kierkegaard recounted Abraham's sacrifice of his son in this book for nerds in two different ways. In the first version of the story, Abraham chooses to sacrifice his son on the mountainside grimly, reluctantly, out of a sense of duty, reasoning that God is testing his faith, and he just has to power through and come to terms with sacrificing what's most important to him. In the second version of the story, Abraham trusts God so much that he happily leads his own son to the slaughter, trusting and believing in God's plan to the point where fear itself ceases to have any effect on him. Super Mario Brother is not Abraham, and that's not a comprehensive reading of Fear and Trembling. But because of the simplicity of Mario's story, he does what he believes in, and that is the end of the conversation. Of course, that's very dangerous if you believe in the wrong thing. Flexibility, adaptability, these are the virtues in our world, and that's probably for the best. This is our reality. But since we don't have that singular, unbroken confidence, we also don't have the joy of Super Mario. I guess not unless we're playing these games.
I think that if video games were explicitly and with expertise designed so that they would afford transfer back to the real world, and let's be honest, many video games don't.
No,
But if they did, that would both ameliorate the temptation to addiction and afford the cultivation of wisdom.
Instead of an escapist fantasy where we get to turn our brain off, what if we saw video games like this as a chance to recharge our souls and our emotions with an unwavering, wholesome joy, or with other sentiments that are hard to come by in day-to-day life? What if video game developers, storytellers, and all artists considered it their job not to earn or keep people's attention, but to create sincere and usable joy? Yeah. What if? Anyway, enough of this pie in the sky, cloud nine, flowery sentimentality in another reality. The real world doesn't have joy in it. So, unfortunately, after effectively flying too close to the sun, Super Mario Brother died, and he had to burn in hell. Inanna, Orpheus, Aeneas, Yeshua, Dante, Lucifer, Anakin. These are just a few of the characters in world literature whose stories involve a trip to the underworld. Super Mario is only continuing this millennia-old tradition. The Mushroom Kingdom is rife with many natural wonders, but Bowser is always found in a castle, in a more industrial setting. He even rides a train that one time, so you know that in keeping with other fantasy stories and other contemporary Japanese animation, the industrial world represents evil in Super Mario. And it's true. The industrial world is a harbinger of death, not just because of climate change or exploitation or something like that, but because it severs millions, billions of people from the means of production, reducing the value and power of a tradesperson, and making us lose touch with physical reality. You could say the biggest question of our time is, can you forge a connection to God while you're also stuck looking at a beige wall? There's a good chance you're sitting in a room right now, exclusively consisting of things that you don't know how to make, which makes us feel inherently like imposters. It contributes to the modern feeling of separation and discontinuity with the built environment, resulting in mass disillusionment for everyone, except for plumbers, who actually do know how at least part of the bathroom is built, in which case you have the key. Are you guys seeing the connection? To unlock the cage, because there's also a princess to save, and the Goombas are the proletariat. Anyway, I'm sorry I made this into a journal article. The point is, let's say we beat all the castles, jump on all the complicit turtles, shimmy over here. Sooner or later, Super Mario's adventure reaches a crescendo. This is where we fight Bowser, also known as the climax of the narrative, for the connoisseurs. Question is, how's this gonna work? Super Mario is small, and he has to fight a great dragon. It's not like it hasn't been done before in literature. Many heroes have killed many beasts and gods, but usually it comes at a cost. Gilgamesh had to lose his friend Enkidu. Beowulf had to die. St. George had to be a saint, which means he probably had to go to church. Super Mario has no magic sword. He's not a noble, not really, or necessarily excessively virtuous. Nope. Super Mario prevails against Bowser because of dexterity and cleverness. You probably know the classic, run over here and do one of these. Yeah, so this is wit and ingenuity usurping the power of the dragon. And because of his wit, he apparently doesn't need to make a sacrifice. Unless you count sacrificing his time, because there's a second phase to the boss. This is like a shadow of the old Enlightenment principle that through your own human cleverness, you can do anything. When Inanna went to hell, she couldn't get out of hell without giving up her husband's life to take her place. When Orpheus went to hell to save his princess, he couldn't bring her back home except under very strict parameters that he failed to live up to. I haven't read the Aeneid. When Jesus went to hell, he was performing an immense sacrifice, as the Christians tell us. Dante was doing something else down there, and Lucifer wasn't allowed back out at all. Faustus had to give up his soul for that earthly human wit and ingenuity. Anakin had to feel immense physical and emotional turmoil. So when Miyamoto lets Mario waltz out of hell with the princess, having only had to display a little bit of agility, you start to wonder what the point of this story is. You might think it doesn't matter. Mario is the go-to game whose story is inconsequential. And sure, you can just play the game if you want. You don't have to be a nerd about it. But you can if you want to. Miyamoto is expressing important elements of his cultural situation when he puts together a story, especially when all it takes is a 5-second cutscene without dialogue for everyone playing it around the world to understand his story. In many of the games, there are special worlds to play through, where humanity, having traveled the many landscapes of the earth and died and gone to hell and back, looks for a new purpose in the final frontier, among the stars, needing the continuance of that structure along which he could continue to ascend. Super Mario had fun frolicking with Princess Peach in the hills for about 5 minutes, but actually achieving the goal of the game is problematic, because at the end of the day, who the heck wants to stop playing Mario? Who wants to stop striving for something that feels like it gives you value and meaning and purpose? Even if it doesn't. The philosophy of Super Mario is continuous striving for its own sake, I think. So, why does this matter at all? Well, consider how many structural similarities almost every single video game that has ever released has with Super Mario Bros. Are there any games that actually do talk about sacrifice? About accepting the limitations of our fate? Closest thing I can think of is like a permadeath type of thing. Or are they all kind of still in this Western, modern, scientific mindset where striving for the sake of striving forward is the name of the game. What do video games have to say about the problem of actually spending time with that friend of yours now that you've saved them from the dragon? Would you rather fight another dragon or hang out with them? At the end of the day, Mario doesn't have a very interesting narrative message, even if it's possible to highlight some similarities to more interesting literature. But my goal with this video has been to explore the possibility of considering video games alongside some of the great works of human achievement, testing out the idea of whether they can actually be considered as such. So far, I think the answer is not quite.